Okay, so picture this. You're out with some friends. Maybe it's a birthday or you're celebrating something, or maybe you're just, winding down after a long week and drinks are on the menu. You know how it goes. But then the thought pops into your head of that early morning workout you've got planned or those fitness goals you're working towards. And you start to wonder, can you really have both? Can you enjoy those social outings with drinks without it like totally sabotaging all the progress you're making? Is every sip like a step backwards?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question for a lot of people, isn't it? How do we balance those social aspects of our lives with our fitness goals?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. We've been poring over this super in-depth YouTube video by Renaissance Periodization, or RP, as I'm sure a lot of you know them by. And it's like a crash course on the full spectrum of how alcohol affects your body. We're talking muscle growth recovery, sleep hormones, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and you know what I really appreciate about this video is it's not just like the typical, alcohol is bad, don't drink if you want to make gains. It actually breaks down the science and looks at how different levels of alcohol consumption can have, very different effects.
And that's perfect for our listeners, right? Because let's be real, you guys are here for the details. You want the full picture so we can make informed decisions that fit our lifestyles and, not just hear a simple yes or no, right? So today we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to see how the impacts change depending on whether you're, someone who enjoys a drink every now and then, or if it's more a daily thing. We'll break down the specifics of how alcohol affects things like protein synthesis and getting a good pump in the gym. Then we'll get into recovery, how it affects your energy stores, inflammation, how your body absorbs nutrients, that kind of thing. And of course, we can't forget about sleep, how alcohol affects your REM cycles and deep sleep, all those hormones that are released while we're catching those Z's. And we'll even share some practical tips on, if you do decide to have a drink, how can you minimize those negative side effects?
Right. It's all about understanding the trade-offs, right? So you can make choices that really align with your priorities.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about levels of alcohol consumption. I mean, it's not just a black and white thing, right? Like, it's not just good or bad.
Yeah.
So how does the amount we drink actually play into this?
Exactly. The video really emphasizes that the effects are very much dose dependent, so it's kind of like a sliding scale. The more you consume, the more pronounced those negative impacts become, particularly when you get to those extremes.
Okay, so let's start with the lighter end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
What about those who enjoy an occasional drink or two, like a glass of wine with dinner or a couple of beers while hanging out with friends? Is that going to throw a wrench in your fitness goals?
The good news is most likely not. The source material makes it clear that if we're talking about just one or two drinks every now and then, the impact on things like your performance, body composition, muscle growth, fat loss, it's generally pretty minimal, and recovery isn't really affected much either, especially if you're choosing lower calorie options like water or diet mixers.
That's reassuring. So you're telling me that casual drink with friends isn't going to undo all the hard work I put in at the gym?
That's right. They suggest that as long as your nutrition is generally on point, having a drink or two, even if you've got a workout the next day, it's not going to derail your progress. A small amount of alcohol isn't going to suddenly halt everything.
All right, that's good to hear. But what if those one or two drinks become more of a regular thing? What happens if we bump it up to, let's say, an average of 1 to 2 drinks every day? Does that start to shift things?
Yeah, at that level, you do start to see some more noticeable effects, but they're still relatively subtle. So, for example, fat loss might slow down a little bit just because, alcohol does contain calories and your body's going to prioritize processing those before it gets to burning fat. Your recovery should still be okay overall, but you might start to notice it more if you're also not sleeping well.
And what about hormones? I know a lot of people are concerned about testosterone levels. Does drinking 1 to 2 drinks a day affect that?
Yeah, you might see a slight dip in testosterone, but the video points out that it's usually not enough to, seriously hinder your muscle gains. You might also notice a little bit of a reduction in REM and deep sleep if you're having those drinks close to bedtime, which, could make you feel a little more tired the next day.
Okay, so maybe a bit more fatigue, and maybe those goals take a little longer to reach, but still manageable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So let's take it up a notch. What if we're talking 3 to 4 drinks a day on average? What starts to happen then?
Okay, now we're getting into the territory where those downsides start to become more pronounced. So you're probably going to notice a bigger hit to your recovery. And the video suggests that at this level, you start to see a reduction in muscle protein synthesis, which is, that process that helps your body build and repair muscle tissue after you exercise. Plus, you're taking in more calories from the alcohol itself. And let's be honest, you might be more likely to reach for those higher calorie foods after a few drinks, which can really start to impact your body composition.
Yeah, definitely. And those testosterone levels we talked about, does that dip get worse with 3 to 4 drinks a day?
Yeah, at this level of consumption, they say you can expect to see more significant testosterone suppression, potentially in the 10 to 15% range, which is definitely not ideal if you're trying to put on muscle.
Oh, that's not great.
Oh.
And what about inflammation? I know alcohol is often linked to increased inflammation in the body.
Right, and the video emphasizes that consuming, 3 to 4 drinks daily can lead to increased systemic inflammation throughout your body. So that can definitely interfere with muscle and joint recovery and just have negative effects on your overall health in general.
So we're seeing a trend here, 1 to 2 drinks a day, maybe a little nudge in the wrong direction, 3 to 4 drinks, starting to see some real obstacles. So let's jump up again. What about 5 to 6 drinks a day on average? What kind of impact are we looking at there?
All right, so at this level, your recovery is going to be significantly impaired. You'll probably find that your muscle soreness lasts longer. And, not the good kind of soreness that indicates muscle growth. It's more because of that ongoing inflammation. You might also start feeling more central nervous system fatigue. So basically, you're just going to feel more sluggish, less motivated to train hard, and just generally run down. And sleep disruption becomes a major problem, especially that deep sleep, which the video really stresses, is so important for muscle growth repair and hormonal balance. Yeah, and I can only imagine what's happening with hormones at this point. Yeah, at 5 to 6 drinks a day, you're likely going to see higher levels of cortisol, that stress hormone that we talked about, which can break down muscle tissue. And then lower levels of testosterone and chronic dehydration is also a big problem at this level, which can lead to weaker pumps during your workouts and increase your risk of injuries, strains or tears, things like that.
This is getting pretty serious. So just to understand the full picture, let's go even further. What, about 7 to 10 drinks a day on average? I think the video even mentioned something about certain drinking cultures when they talked about this level.
Yeah, they did touch on that a bit. So at that level of regular consumption, you're looking at a severe and chronic drop in both testosterone and growth hormone, which are essential for, building and maintaining muscle base creatine. You're creating an environment in your body that is just not conducive to muscle growth at all. And the chronic dehydration is a huge issue at this point. It increases your risk of injury, hinders those muscle plugs, and you're also just way more likely to gain body fat because of all the calories from the alcohol and the way it messes with your metabolism. They even suggest that at this range, you might actually start losing muscle mass because of the constant inflammation and oxidative stress, and trying to optimize your recovery at this point is basically like fighting a losing battle.
Wow. So basically everything is working against you at this point. All right, so final stage. What about those on the far end of the spectrum? What about those consuming 11 or more drinks a day on average? I'm assuming at that point we're moving beyond just fitness concerns, right? This is getting into some serious health territory.
Absolutely. I mean, the video pretty much straight up says that at that level, you're likely dealing with alcoholism, and muscle breakdown can actually start to outpace any potential for muscle growth, so you're potentially losing muscle mass chronically. Liver damage becomes a real concern, which further messes with your body's ability to store glycogen, which is, your muscle's primary fuel source. Your energy for workouts is going to be in the toilet. Your cognitive and motor functions are going to be impaired, and you're likely dealing with severe hormonal imbalances, super high estrogen, very low testosterone. It's just not good.
Okay, so we've laid out the full spectrum of effects, and it's pretty clear that while an occasional drink here and there might not be a huge deal, the more you drink, the more significant those negative consequences become, both for your fitness and your overall health. So let's zoom in a bit. Let's talk about how alcohol directly impacts muscle growth. What's going on at the cellular level when we introduce alcohol into the mix.
So one of the main ways alcohol interferes with muscle growth is by messing with protein synthesis. Particularly after you work out, it basically impairs the activity of something called mTOR.
mTOR. So is that like a signal in our bodies that tells our muscles to, grow and repair after we exercise?
Exactly. mTOR is like the master switch that kicks off muscle building, and alcohol basically comes in and flips that switch to off, or at least dims it way down. And then on top of that, alcohol makes your muscles dehydrated, which can make them feel weaker and increase your risk of, pulls or tears during your workout. And for those of us who love that feeling of a good pump, well, alcohol messes with that too.
Yeah, the pump, it's not just about aesthetics, right? It's a mental thing too.
Yeah.
You feel those muscles all full and engaged, and it can really motivate you to push harder.
Exactly. The video even talks about the psychological benefits of that pump feeling. And then there's this other thing called acetaldehyde, which is a byproduct that your body creates when it breaks down alcohol, and it's actually toxic. It increases inflammation in your muscles and slows down that repair process. And in those, really severe cases of chronic heavy drinking we were talking about, it can even contribute to muscle atrophy, which is like a wasting away of the muscle tissue because it throws off that normal cycle of muscle protein breakdown and rebuilding.
So even if you're hitting the gym consistently, if you're drinking heavily on a regular basis, you're working against yourself, your body's ability to build muscle is compromised. Okay, so we talked about muscle growth. Now, let's switch gears to recovery. How does alcohol impact our ability to bounce back after a tough workout?
There are several ways alcohol hinders recovery. One of the big ones is it slows down the resynthesis of glycogen, which is, the stored form of carbs in your muscles. Glycogen is like the main fuel source for your muscles when you're doing intense activity, and it also plays a role in getting those pumps and supporting muscle growth. So when you're not replenishing glycogen efficiently, your recovery suffers on multiple fronts.
Okay, so no fuel for the muscles, no pumps, and it's harder to build muscle.
Got it.
Got it. What else is contributing to this recovery slowdown?
Well, alcohol also increases oxidative stress in your body, which can lead to longer and different types of muscle soreness. It's not necessarily that deep DOMS that, that soreness you feel a day or two after a hard workout. It's more like a widespread achy kind of feeling. And then, that chronic systemic inflammation that we've been talking about, alcohol makes that worse, which of course hinders overall recovery. On top of all that, alcohol can reduce the efficiency with which your body absorbs nutrients from food. So even if you're eating a healthy post-workout meal, you might not be getting all the benefits from it. And then, of course, there's the dehydration, which we've already talked about, but that just makes everything worse, especially when you combine it with the inflammation.
It's like alcohol is setting up roadblocks left and right to prevent proper recovery.
Yeah.
So let's talk about sleep. I think this is something a lot of us have experienced firsthand. You have a few drinks, you fall asleep easily, but then you wake up feeling anything but rested. What's going on there?
The video explains that alcohol messes with both REM sleep and deep sleep. REM sleep is super important for, things like cognitive restoration, memory consolidation, even motor skill learning. So if you're trying to improve your lifting technique, for example, alcohol can actually get in the way of that. And then deep sleep, that's when the majority of your growth hormone is released. And that's crucial for physical recovery and muscle repair. So when alcohol disrupts deep sleep, it directly messes with these essential processes.
So it's not just about how many hours you sleep, it's about the quality of sleep you're getting. And alcohol really compromises that.
Exactly. Alcohol might make you feel sleepy at first, and you might fall asleep quickly and stay asleep for part of the night. But the overall quality of that sleep is just not as good. You don't get those restorative benefits. And a lot of people find that they wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning after drinking, often with, elevated levels of cortisol, that stress hormone we talked about. And then that disrupted sleep leads to more fatigue during the day, less motivation to train, and it's just harder to stay consistent with your fitness routine. And then you add in the dehydration from the alcohol, and it's a recipe for, potentially training in a dehydrated state, which further hinders your performance and recovery.
It's like a domino effect, right? Bad sleep leads to fatigue, which messes with your motivation and consistency, and your body just can't recover and grow as effectively.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper into the hormonal effects. We've touched on testosterone and cortisol, but what else is going on hormonally when we drink alcohol?
Right. So as we've discussed, alcohol, particularly when consumed regularly and in higher amounts, lowers your testosterone and increases cortisol. And that creates this hormonal environment that's just not good for muscle growth. It's actually more catabolic, meaning it breaks down muscle tissue. On top of that, alcohol can reduce the release of growth hormone, which is so important for tissue repair, muscle hypertrophy or growth fat loss, and even joint recovery. So less growth hormone equals less efficient healing and slower progress overall.
And I know insulin sensitivity plays a key role in managing body composition and energy levels. How does alcohol impact that?
If you're drinking a lot chronically, it can definitely have a negative impact on your insulin sensitivity, which basically means your body isn't as good at using the carbohydrates you eat for energy and muscle recovery. So those calories, particularly when you're drinking or right after, are more likely to be stored as fat instead of being used by your muscles. And then to make matters worse, alcohol can also increase estrogen levels in the body. And when you've got high estrogen levels combined with low testosterone, which alcohol also contributes to, it's just not a good combination for body composition, you might end up with less muscle and more fat.
So it's like alcohol is throwing a hormonal party in your body, and it's definitely not the kind of party you want if you're trying to reach your fitness goals. Now, the good news is the video acknowledges that for a lot of people, completely abstaining from alcohol isn't realistic or even something they want to do, so they offer some practical tips on how to minimize these negative effects if you do decide to enjoy a drink. What are some of those strategies?
Well, the first and probably most important piece of advice is less is better. They even talk about this concept of a U-shaped curve when it comes to enjoyment and alcohol. You might have a great time with a moderate amount, but as you drink more and more, that enjoyment actually starts to decrease while the negative consequences go way up. So they recommend finding that sweet spot for yourself where you can still socialize and have fun without overdoing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we've all been there where one more drink takes you from feeling good to feeling not so good real quick.
Yeah.
So what about the timing of your workouts in relation to drinking? Does that matter?
Definitely, they recommend putting as much time as possible between your workouts and your drinking, ideally at least 4 to 6 hours after you've finished training. This gives your body a chance to kick off that protein synthesis process, that muscle repair and growth we talked about before you introduce alcohol into the system. And they say to definitely avoid drinking immediately after a workout.
So timing is key. What about what we eat around the time we're drinking? Does that play a role?
Yeah. This is interesting. The video actually suggests that drinking on a relatively empty stomach can lead to a faster and more efficient buzz, which could mean you end up drinking less overall to get the desired effect. But they also caution against feasting right before you drink because that can just delay the effects. And they recommend pacing yourself throughout the evening instead of, chugging drinks back to back, and try to make a conscious effort to stop drinking as things wind down and start rehydrating.
So it's about being mindful and strategic with your drinking instead of just going all out. What are during and after drinking any damage control tips we should keep in mind?
Well, while you're drinking, it's good to try and incorporate some non-alcoholic fluids. Maybe have a glass of water between alcoholic drinks. But the real focus is on what you do after you're done drinking. Prioritize fluids. They specifically mention Gatorade Zero as a good option to replenish electrolytes and try to eat something with salt, carbs, and protein. They acknowledge that you might be craving junk food, but, chicken and rice or something similar is going to be much better for recovery. And it's generally a good idea to keep your fat intake lower when you're recovering from a night of drinking.
So electrolytes, carbs, protein, low fat. Good. Sounds like a solid post-party recovery plan. What about the types of drinks? Does it matter what we choose to drink?
Yeah, it definitely does. The video suggests sticking with clear liquors mixed with diet soda or other zero-calorie mixers because they tend to be lower in calories, which is better for your body composition goals. Light beers and hard ciders are better than their regular counterparts, and those full sugar mixed drinks, like margaritas or sugary cocktails, those are the worst because of all the sugar and calories. Dry wines are a slightly better option than sweeter wines.
So basically, the less sugar and calories, the better when it comes to minimizing the negative impact. What about the time of day or night that we drink? Does that make a difference?
Well, theoretically, if you're going to drink doing it earlier in the day, might be a little better for your sleep later on, but realistically, most social drinking happens at night. So the more practical advice is to try and stop drinking at least 3 to 4 hours before you plan to go to bed. That can help improve your sleep quality and lessen the negative impacts on muscle growth and fat loss. They also talk about the idea of, trying to be more present and engaged earlier in the night during happy hour or dinner instead of trying to rally late into the night. And they stress the importance of rehydrating and eating something after the party instead of just passing out.
So if you're serious about your fitness goals, maybe aim to be the early bird partier rather than the night owl.
Yeah.
Okay, so the video also touches on the idea of perspective and individual goals. How does all this information apply to different people with different priorities?
Right. They acknowledge that for some people, those who aren't, super intensely focused on reaching peak physical performance, like maybe college students or people who are just generally interested in being healthy and fit, simply cutting back on how often they drink and how much they drink can make a huge difference in how they feel and their overall progress, while still allowing them to enjoy those social situations. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have athletes competing in things like bodybuilding, where alcohol is generally frowned upon, especially leading up to a competition when every little detail matters.
It's all about finding that balance that works for you and your individual goals.
Mm-hmm.
The video even mentions the RP Hypertrophy app and the RP Diet Coach app as resources that can help you dial in your training and nutrition, which can then help you make better choices around alcohol as part of your overall plan.
Yeah, those tools can definitely provide you with that structure and guidance to make informed decisions about your diet and training and help you see how things like alcohol fit into the bigger picture.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground today. This has been a super comprehensive deep dive. So to recap, the main takeaways seem to be that alcohol's impact on muscle growth and fitness is not black and white. It's all about the dose. It affects everything from how your body builds and repairs muscle to the quality of your sleep and your hormone levels. Even moderate drinking on a regular basis can have negative consequences, and heavy drinking is just bad news all around.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's important to remember that, all of these different negative effects, they often work together and make each other worse, creating this environment in your body that's just not ideal for reaching your fitness goals.
So for our listeners now, you have a much better understanding of what's really happening when you have a drink. Take a moment to think about your own drinking habits and how they align with your fitness goals. Maybe there's one or two small changes you can make based on what we've discussed today. Even small adjustments could have a big impact on your progress and how you feel overall.
And this leads us to a final thought for you to consider now that you have all this information. How might you approach your social life and your fitness goals differently? Is there a way to redefine what having a good time means to you in a way that also supports your long-term health and fitness goals?
That's something to think about for sure. All right, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into alcohol and fitness. We'll catch you in the next one.
See you then. Bye.